A successful economy depends on both business dynamism and efficient taxation. Business, along with government, drive the economy, providing jobs, delivering growth and prosperity, and ensuring that citizens have the goods and services that they need. Beginning July 1st, internet users, motorists, and consumers of both alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages will be required to dig deeper into their pockets to fund the national budget's expenditure after Parliament on the last day of April 30th endorsed a range of government's proposed taxes in a frantic move to raise revenue to fund its expenditure. Under the Excise Duty Amendment Bill 2021 that was endorsed by Parliament, internet users will have to dig deep into their pockets to pay a 12% levy on internet bundles, even after the tax proposal was strongly opposed by the private sector, let alone the civil society organization. In the world where cyberspace is the new fuel replacing oil and gas companies as well as brick and mortar companies, this tax has been large. There's been a lot of flack against this tax. To discuss this subject, titled Tax, Duty or Curse, Citizens' Views on Business, Tax and the Economy, we have a panel of 4, including CS Bag's Budget Policy Specialist, Patrick Rubanga-Kene, Sauti za Wananchi's Maria Nanyazi, who is a regular panelist with us, Agnes Kirabo of Food Rights Alliance, and Paul Lakuma from the Economic Policy Research Center, who is going to be joining us on Zoom. To begin with you, Paul, as you're aware, during the budget reading, a new tax, the 12% tax on the internet was imposed, as well as a tax on fuel. In your view, and we are aware that it's very likely that the telecom companies are going to impose this tax on the consumers. In your view, Paul, as you're joining us on Zoom, is this a progressive tax policy or is it regressive? Thank you.
Well, in regard to I think there was a need to make it uniform. Initially, the predecessor of that tax was the over-the-top tax with the OTT, which was on social media. Unfortunately, it did not realize the revenue it was aligned to it. So to harmonize the taxation system and to make it fair for everybody across board was the introduction of an excise tax of 12% and a removal of over-the-top tax, which was the OTT, which was an excise, but it was kind of segregated in a way for those who access social media. So you pay as you access social media. If you don't, then you don't pay. But this time it's across board. If you access the internet, you have to pay, except with exemptions on educational and health services. Health and educational services are still exempt. So if you are accessing internet to research on material which is of educational purposes, or if the internet is being used for like telemedicine, to conduct a medical procedure, then the tax is exempt. The problem would be how to administer the exemption. How is the tax administration going to administer the exemption? Well, it's going to be a claim, like the way VAT is designed. That would provide another layer of administrative challenge. For a country which is looking for financial inclusion and looking to develop the digital economy, one would say the tax is working against that objective. But if you look at it on the other side of the coin, is that we have to pay for our ways. There are a broad range of wish lists of services which the government needs to provide, and someone has to pay for it. And we have to contribute a fair share if we are always online, getting all this entertainment, all this information. We have to pay some little bit to the government so that that service continues, and other services such as roads, energy sector, provisions for businesses and for employment continues to be provided. So it's a double-edged sword. One, it may impede on the speed of implementation of the desire to be a digital economy. It may slow it down, not that it will stop it, but also it may contribute to the country's development, particularly in the objective of provision of infrastructure, including internet infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Paul says the tax policy is a double-edged sword. Well, to some extent, they are supposed to raise revenue, but definitely to some other extent, they are fairly regressive. Once again, welcome to Citizen Voices. Our hashtag is Amplifying Citizen Voices. And with us, once again, we have a panel of 4 very distinguished speakers who are going to thrash out and interrogate this subject, tax, duty, or CAS. To bring you in, Agnes Kirabo, during the budget speech, you must have been very keen about the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector, which we know is the fulcrum, the economic pulse of this country, because many of our people practice agriculture as means of economic survival. Agriculture also employs the bulk of people in the rural economy. Coffee, as we speak, is our leading export, bringing in close to $500 million US dollars. If we engaged in value addition, perhaps would even make $1 billion. In your view, did the budget capture, was it fair to this vital agriculture sector?
Thank you so much, Emma. And good evening, viewers, this evening. You know, we are wananchi, and we are doing a conversation of the voice of the citizens. And I wish to take your question at that level and not at my level as a person who would listen to the English and get to understand it. I think, by and large, day after day, we are seeing a growing gap between the budget framers and actually the budget consumers. Because the wananchi are supposed to consume the budget decisions that the budget framers have taken. And more often than not, it has become a ritual. Because at the end of the day, let us talk about farmers, who are 68% according to the most recently released statistical abstract. There has been several budgets that are making proposals of reducing or at most slapping no tax on agricultural inputs. For instance, and the farmers at no moment in that financial year have ever felt that privilege or call it a favor or such a policy decision during the budget. They cannot come on record to say, after having that pronouncement that this particular financial year, we are not going to have a tax on agricultural inputs, like it has always been declared, that one was reflected in the prices of the agricultural inputs. Instead, the prices keep skyrocketing. It has never been a tool for quality, because these are some of the functions of a tax. It has never been a tool of facilitating access, because that is what it does. It has never been a tool of facilitating development of this particular sector. So the farmers go to you and come to you and ask, but we heard during the budget that they are not going to put any tax on the agricultural inputs, but the agricultural input prices have never been slashed down. So that is just one example. Then the budget is read, but eventually the wananchi in their lives do not see some of these decisions translating.
So in essence, it's an elitist document.
And in many cases, the whole process then turns out to be a ritual. And we get a problem. Those of us who engage citizens in this particular process, and they get eager, but at one moment in time, they are lost. I can just tell you this example. In April, if you look at the figures that actually Parliament approved, and the figures that eventually the minister presented this week, a total difference. So here is the citizenry. This here is the wananchi that together with CS-BAG we have been engaging in this particular process. They sit and say, okay, now this is where Parliament has approved. And eventually when they hear the minister speak, it becomes a different story. Lastly, the story is not ending this week when the budget was read. That is why I'm not sticking to the figures to say agriculture was eventually given as a sector and not as part of the program, the 1.7 trillion. How does it translate in service delivery? And that is where the detail is. Because eventually there is going again to be a difference between what was, you see, there was the difference between what Parliament approved. There is a difference, there is a different figure that the minister presented this week. And there's going to be a different figure at the end of the financial year of how much money exactly was given to the sector. So the wananchi, the farmers out there, are interested in eventually what has government invested, how much money has been released.
Thank you very much, Agnes. To bring in Marie, you've been going around the country collecting data. And one of the things that I find quite interesting from the data that you've collected says a substantial number of Ugandans, if they had an opportunity, they would cheat and not pay taxes.
Yes.
Well, it's very scary, but perhaps it gives an insight into, perceptions about paying tax, which is also linked to service delivery. In the West, when you pay tax, you expect a first-class road without potholes, you expect better service delivery, you expect hospitals that are fully equipped. What do you have to say about that?
Thank you, Emmanuel, and good evening, viewers. So from the data we have collected, yes, we do see that half of the citizens would cheat the tax if they had a chance to do that. And I guess if you speak to the wananchi in any location, they say, yeah, it's probably justified. But another insight we've seen from the data that we've collected is that between 2017 and 2019, half of Ugandans feel that it's their duty to pay the taxes regardless of whether the service delivery is done or not. And in 2017, that number was about 47%. And in 2020, December, that number went up to about just 50%. In the ideal world where you will have all citizens paying their taxes, that number should be a lot higher, that everyone believes that it's a duty, that it's part of their civic duty to pay taxes, but that is not the case. But when we look at the data, we also do see that there's probably a lot more tax education needed for our citizens, because 6 out of 10 who are doing business believe that they do not need a trade license to actually operate, which shows you that for all the taxes that are usually collected, it really falls to the formal sector, that a large part of the informal sector is left out. So if at all we are talking about the current budget and how that is going to be financed, you really look at it and just think that this is really going to keep pressing those that are in the formal sector a lot harder. And then also when it comes to the consumption taxes, that is on utilities and so on, that it's going to get a lot harder because that's where the easy, or should I say the easy money is. But if at all it was a lot easier to incentivize the informal sector, get them to pay more taxes. For example, those that are in agriculture, if at all there are circles, how do you get the circle to actually motivate people to pay taxes? Because now we've heard that there is a move towards getting more storage facilities for Ugandans, for farmers across different regions. So if that is the case, then maybe there ought to be some incentive that if at all you're registered, you have this in place, then you can easily use this facility. That would help to broaden the tax base. But as it is, I think there are quite a number of areas that could be done better.
Okay, to bring in Patrick. Patrick, as you're aware, a country needs to collect taxes to be able to provide services to its citizens. Uganda's tax to GDP ratio is lower than the average GDP in sub-Saharan Africa, which is 17%. Uganda's, I think, is about 14%. That's the highest it has been able to climb. And Tunisia's, I think, which is the highest, is about 29.4%. What is that magic one? We keep talking about improving the tax to GDP ratio. What do we need to do to be able to collect more taxes, in your view?
Good evening, viewers. Thank you, Emma, for that question. If you look at Uganda tax, the revenue to GDP, it's quite low. I think we are trending at 13%. And if you compare with our neighbors, Kenya and Tanzania, we are quite low. I think the challenge that the country faces when it comes to tax collection is quite broad. Let's look at the tax registers in the country. I think we have a total of 1.5 million persons or Ugandans. That's both the individuals and the non-individuals that are currently paying taxes. And so that's where now the issue starts. So that means from the onset, we haven't captured so many people into the tax bracket. And yet, these are the same people who are bearing much of the burden of the tax. And it brings in fatigue. As a result of fatigue, we are seeing tax avoidance, tax evasion setting in. So now to get back to your question, what should really be done? I think one key thing that URA, the tax body, should really do is to create awareness. Not so many Ugandans out there know that is their duty to pay tax and what are the types of taxes they're supposed to pay. For example, we have just passed a new budget and the new tax measures that have been brought on board. So there is need to create that awareness so that people get to know that this is a tax that has come and I'm supposed to pay. Secondly, look at the quality of services that government delivers to the citizens or to the taxpayers. Once citizens or taxpayers don't get to realize the value for their money, most of them fall out from paying taxes because they start questioning themselves, why should I pay tax? And yet I don't get to see value for that tax. Another thing that also pushes away people from paying tax, it's the issue of the inequalities in the tax systems. I can give you a good example, the issues of tax exemptions. There are companies in this country that are benefiting from tax exemptions, and which is actually unfairly given to them. Because one, not so many of us get to know how does one qualify to get a tax exemption. And how often do we publish such a list, maybe in the public space, so that we get to know these are the people who are exempted from tax and why they're exempted from tax? Because that brings in a loophole. We have seen investors come into the country, they benefit from the tax holidays, and once it's done, they walk out. So that brings in that kind of apathy. Then another issue is the ease when it comes to tax collection. We have seen government going for the low-hanging fruits because enforcement is an issue. So you see now taxes that are really very easy to collect because like the indirect taxes. For example, we are seeing now the 100 shilling increment in fuel. So these are taxes which are really very easy, indirect. But at the end of the day, what motivates someone to pay that tax? Because if they have a way of evading it, chances are they will, because they're not seeing the benefits being realized from such taxes.
Patrick, thank you for that. You talk about the issue of tax holidays and the opaqueness in terms of what kind of criteria government uses to grant these tax holidays. Definitely, when they are largely given to multinationals, and when you enforce that kind of tax holiday, you strangulate the local investors who are paying very high tariffs for electricity and other costs. We're going to take a commercial break. This is Citizen Voices, and our hashtag is Amplifying Citizen Voices. We'll be back to discuss more on this topic, tax, duty, or CAS. Thank you for watching. Welcome back. This is Citizen Voices, and we have a panel of four. We are discussing the issue on tax duty, whether it's a CAS. And joining us once again on Zoom is Paul Lokuma, who works with the Economic Policy Research Center. Paul, my question is, there's a view out there that the economy is in the hands of foreign multinational companies rather than indigenous citizens. And many of these companies engage in a sophisticated form of tax avoidance, where they are domiciled in secrecy jurisdictions and safe havens, and engage in very complex systems like layering to avoid paying taxes. Recently in London, the G7, their finance ministers passed a kind of resolution demanding that these big multinational firms should owe up and pay taxes. Do we have any hope that countries in sub-Saharan Africa can be able to rein in these very powerful multinational companies to ensure that they keep their bargain and be able to pay taxes?
Yes, Emma, yes and no. One is, even without the multinationals hiding outputs or using tax planning and using all these sophisticated lawyers to advise them where to put their money, where to register, because registration is part of, it kind of defines where you're going to pay taxes. So these companies look for countries with treaties with Uganda, like Mauritius, the Netherlands, with a double taxation treaty with Uganda. So they register there, and those countries tend to be tax haven. It's not like what they're doing is illegal, really. It's just working within the law to achieve certain objectives. So, like they realize Netherlands and Uganda and Mauritius is has a double taxation agreement with Uganda. So they register in the Netherlands and Mauritius. So Netherlands also attract these companies because they bring in other value other than taxation, like employment, bring in capital in the country, they do the accounting in the country, they report the profits in the country. So then the taxes are reported in the Netherlands, so they can't be reported. So there's that. But there are arrangements between URA and Mauritius and Netherlands. So a discussion is going on how to handle that mispricing, misinvoicing, the double taxation, and how that is leading to revenue leakage. Apart from that, our incentive systems also creates room for exploitation. It's not like we are void of knowledge that we are being exploited, but it's because we need to look at to be attractive in the region which is competitive. Rwanda wants these investors, Kenya wants these investors, Uganda wants these investors. So we have an incentive system which makes us vulnerable to exploitation. These are deductions on debt, on equity, depreciation, general depreciation rates, loss declarations. Before, I think 3 years ago, we had an infinite loss declaration. If you declare losses for infinitely, that's exempt until the law was changed for about 7 years. Now, in this budget, the law was again changed that you cannot depreciate in the first year. You depreciate your capital in the second and third and fourth subsequent years. There are tax holidays which were very generous. Companies work between 10 and 15 years. Companies can exploit these holidays. When the holiday expires, they change the name of the company or they close the company and leave. What you would call the footloose companies. So our regime, our capital regime has not been the best. But it's not because it was not designed in the best way. It's because also the region is competitive. If you don't offer good incentives, these companies will end up going to Kenya or going to Rwanda. Though there are studies which show that tax is not the only thing companies consider. They consider the type of human resource, the availability of electricity, good roads, good water, people with good work ethics who justify the cost of the salaries they earn. They produce their productivity justifies the cost of the salaries they earn. Those are some of the things companies also consider before they set up a company. However, you can't be so confident about that. So that's why countries set up these incentives to attract investments. And then these companies come and they exploit the system and they end up not paying taxes. Though now we need to do CBAs, cost-benefit analysis, to check whether the benefits these companies bring offset the cost, the tax cost they cost the economy. This is in regard with to jobs, to value, transfer of technology. You can't do without multinationals. They have the knowledge. You need that knowledge to develop your value addition, your manufacturing processes. You need to bring them here so that they can transfer the technology to the local companies so that our local investors can learn. One of the policies I would recommend is to attach local investors to these multinationals. The way it's done in India, Botswana, or United Arab Emirates. For you to establish a company, you must have a local partner whose work is to steal your knowledge. Sorry for use of that word. To steal, stealing goods, but to learn. Okay, learn is a better word. To learn from you, learn your way of doing business, learn your ethics, learn your technology. And then after some time, he can decide to separate from you. The way companies like there are those two-wheeler companies which develop motorcycles in India. They started as partners of Japanese Kawasaki and Yamaha. And now India is a competitor to Kawasaki and Yamaha because they learned the technology, they learned the business.
Thank you so.
I think those are.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that. You talk about the issue of tax incentives and why countries offer tax incentives because they are trying to attract investors. But my view is sometimes we need to do some bit of vetting because in Uganda, many times we have briefcase companies, we give land, we give tax holidays, and it turns out that they are not up to scratch. They are not doing. If you look at Nakuru and the Nakuru land, previously the Shimoni land, when we sent away our kids, and there was this talk of Al Walid investing in a 7-star hotel, and it didn't come to pass. The other thing that definitely talked about is the issues in regard to the multinationals and how they avoid paying taxes. I know Ghana, for instance, has passed progressive law in regard to the double taxation agreement. So I guess there are so many things to learn from there. But to bring you in, Agnes, one of the key things during the budget speech Honorable Amos Lugolobi read at Kololo Independence Grounds was on the issue of agro-industrialization and stimulating our SMEs. What do we need to do to get that sector working?
You see, for years we have kept the agriculture sector out of the economy. And when I hear the drive to bring the subsistence into the money economy, I think we need to do much more than what we are talking about. For instance, how much of the investors that we have been discussing here, and we are attracting them, are agro-based? How many incentives, if they are to be counted, that are given to agro-based SMEs? How much are we investing in cottage industries to grow the value chains effectively? We cannot be all over, however, and we think that we can put a brand product in the market and claim a market share within the country and beyond. You listen to the Minister, Honorable Golobi, talking about the parish development model. And after a very tough engagement we have had with these people, they have reduced the commodity lines from 18 to 14. And now they are here saying for financial inclusion, every parish has been allocated 30 million. 30 million. That is the money that can be borrowed by one person and actually doesn't make a catch out of that particular investment. And we are putting it at a parish. Well, this is what we have to do. Agro-industrialization surely has a lot of potential to transform this economy because it is an agrarian economy. But it is not only a curse that we are an agrarian economy. The issue is there is no time in the world where people are going to mine the food. The food has to be farmed. And every time there is a population, there is going to be food. And if you look at us here, the bulk of what we are here, it is agro-based. So it has a lot of potential, but we have to change the game and the way we do the game and have an inclusive system that actually defines key value chains. We need to have a brand because he was talking about investment being competitive, but the markets are competitive too. You cannot be all over. You're known for beans, you're known for maize, you're known for everything. You can't have a market share of everything because you're not going to mobilize your technologies, you're not going to mobilize your finances, you're not going to mobilize the technical capacities, but also the foreign relationship to negotiate a particular market share. So we are looking forward to seeing these talks going out of the words, and we actually do organize the entire economy on particular value chains, including our foreign relations.
Oh, thank you for that. Marie Nanyanzi, what are those very pertinent issues that Ugandans want addressed according to your survey?
Okay. Thank you. So from the data that we collected in December last year, we asked the most serious problems facing Ugandans, and the first one, top on the list, was the health facilities and health services. This was followed by the lack of employment, and then it was followed by inflation. So this, you can see, is really related to what Agnes was talking about, that if you're talking about inflation, this is really going to affect Ugandans in terms of the food that they are consuming. In other words, now we need to really look more at the agricultural sector. How do we ensure that we deal with this issue of the inflation? Things like promoting the local content, that is ensure that whenever you're attracting, different companies to bid for certain service, that you ensure that there is adherence to that, most of the companies that are going to be given those tenders have a bias towards having more of Ugandan goods used, or raw materials, and also hiring more Ugandans, because this again also looks at the issue of the lack of employment. Because if at all you're, just like the first speaker mentioned, the issue of the multinationals. So it's good to have them, but as they are here, how about the succession plan? Is there, you could find that most of them have a 10-year succession plan. Can this be reduced to probably 2 years and ensure that within those first 2 years, someone is closely following up on these investors that have come in, and they are able to train more Ugandans to have jobs in those companies, because in the long run, that is the only way we shall be able to promote Ugandan or local content, because quite often a foreigner or a foreign company will get that bid because they believe they have the expertise. But how do we ensure that there is a sustainable process of ensuring that we are promoting this local content and deal with the 3 issues, which are the health, the lack of employment, and also the inflation? Because for the health, I think when we look at what happens in the data, when we look at what happens at the household, there is a slight twist. What comes up top of mind is inflation, and then this is followed by the lack of employment, and then health. And I believe the reason health drops at that level, it's because we have 50% of Ugandans that go to the government facilities, and then the other 50 go to private facilities, meaning that now health becomes less of a priority at the household level, but at a national level, this is really a critical issue. So that's why I think, in summary, I would say that to have the security taking the larger portion of the budget during a pandemic, and health is not really that large, I think there is something that ought to have been looked at in a different way.
That's very important, Marie. I think the COVID pandemic requires that the health sector is perhaps the key priority in budgeting, because our hospitals should be equipped with these facilities. But to bring in Patrick, on subject of taxation, there's been a view out there that perhaps one of the other ways to improve our, to widen our tax base is to, find innovative ways to bring on board the informal sector, so that we don't, overburden a very specific group of people who are paying taxes. But 2, to introduce also a capital gains tax on the wealthy. And this would work in a way that it would target people who have, corruptly acquired wealth, and if they are subjected to a kind of lifestyle audit, that they are not able to account for their wealth. What is your view about that?
I think that would be good. For example, if you had to come up with a capital gains tax, so that would be a more progressive tax, because we are looking at the burden of the tax resting more on the shoulders of those who have the abilities to pay. In this country, for example, given the high levels of corruption, so much is being lost, and we are seeing the corrupt really investing much of their acquired wealth in the real estate sector. So that's a sign, it's giving you a lead or a direction where we could focus in. We would appreciate, for example, the initiative that has been taken by URA for the rental income tax, which I think is something which is very progressive, and by charging them the 30%, I think we shall be in position to get something off these individuals who have invested heavily in the real estate sector. But beyond that, how best can we nurture and get the people who are in the informal sector to pay more tax? I think what we need to do, the uniqueness that we have as a country, when it comes to startup, we are ranked highest. There are so many cottage industries, there are so many SMEs that start up, but unfortunately they don't live to celebrate their first birthday. And yet these are the SMEs that would have contributed to the tax bracket. So we really need to nurture them before we really, URA starts hitting these SMEs had to pay tax. Why don't we give them a window? We build, and until such a point, maybe after 2 years, when they have stabilized and they're generating now the much needed income, then we can start taxing them. So once we get such, we adopt such measures, it will be more beneficial. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for that. I encourage citizens to pay your taxes, but government should also improve service delivery. We've been discussing tax duty. We've been interrogating the issues of paying taxes in this country, and we've drawn a connection to businesses in this country and the economy. And this evening we're joined by a panel of 4. Thank you very much for watching Citizen Voices. I've been your host, Emmanuel Mutaiziwa. Have a pleasant evening.